For comrades who are here for the first time, welcome everybody. My name is Roger Silverman. I'll be chairing today's meeting. I would say, just as we open, what's happened in recent weeks in Afghanistan obviously has worldwide repercussions. The rout of US and British imperialism marks a definitive point in world history, highlighting sharply the paradox of our times, the deepening and inescapable crisis of the ruling class on the one hand, and the current desperate lack of a coherent socialist alternative. Of course, it represents a historic humiliation for American and British imperialism, a 20-year war costing billions of dollars, hundreds of US and British soldiers and thousands of Afghans' lives, subjecting the Afghan civilian population to indescribable hardship, has ended with a definitive reversion to the status quo ante as it was in 2001, the tyranny of the dreaded Taliban. We did actually previously have some loose... can everybody mute themselves, please? We had some contact previously, very loosely, with an Afghani trade union leader, but he, of course, is not in a position to speak to us today. I believe he's in hiding. But while the voices of Afghan workers and trade unionists are for the moment silenced under the Taliban terror, we are very proud to welcome 3 Marxist activists from regions bordering Afghanistan, which are the home of millions of Afghan refugees. Hamid Khan lives in Balochistan on the border of Afghanistan, an area which itself is under military occupation. He's a Marxist, a leading trade unionist, and a frequent writer for the Urdu fortnightly Jihad, or The Struggle, and also for the English language Asian Marxist Review. Aman Kafar is, of course, a regular participant in WIN meetings. He's a leading member of the Worker Communist Party of Iran, the Hekmatist official line, and he's also an active trade unionist in Britain. And Farooq Sureria is a Pakistani, a long-time socialist activist who has lived in Asia and in Europe, but more to the point, he's also lived in Kabul and has an intimate personal knowledge of the terrain. So between these comrades, they have a wealth of knowledge and a unique insight into the situation. They have kindly agreed to keep their opening remarks to a maximum of 45 minutes between them to allow for extensive questions and discussion. So I'm going to call first on, is Hamid here?
Thank you, Comrade Roger. Hi, comrades. I'm feeling really proud and prestigious to talk on Afghanistan perspective in front of great Marxist teachers and professional revolutionaries. First of all, please accept my apology for my weak English language, as it is neither a medium of teaching here in educational institutions and nor spoken in society in general. So I may not well convey my thoughts due to language barrier to you, comrades. So it needs to analyze socio-economic and political development of Afghanistan on historical basis to understand today's current situation of the country. But due to some compulsions of time and space, we are bound to discuss the latest emerging situation in Afghanistan, which has swiped other issues from international political horizon. I would discuss briefly some main points which are of significant importance in the context of the starting of new era on international scale. Yesterday, America marked the 20th anniversary of the attack incident of 9/11 on Twin Towers. The 9/11 incident was a pretext to assault on Afghanistan, Iraq, and the whole Middle East in general, with the aim of eradicating fundamentalism introducing democracy and development, a fabricated pretext to invade the sovereign countries centuries ago. But as described by Comrade Trotsky, that the American imperialism is a giant whose feet are made of clay. So when she put soldiers in Afghanistan, poured $2.4 trillion, which is 8 times bigger than the Pakistan's total economy, which doesn't need explanation, that the huge amount went into the pockets of big companies of military war industrial complex. Eric Prince, the head of notorious security companies head, and his killing mercenaries, corrupt government officials and warlords. Having 2,400 casualties and more than 10,000 injured personnel, American lost the war very disgracefully, leaving the unfortunate country in the midnight like a mice. Leaving shambles in hasty retreat, her puppet president for the country, Ashraf Ghani, went on the same path paved by his masters. This was not a normal war defeat of a superpower in the war against the guerrilla militants of poorest country of the world, but it is the explicit demise of the neoliberalism, not only in Afghanistan, but in the whole eastern region of the world. The words of Francis Fukuyama and of the history could have been seen in the deeds and practices of American imperialism in Russia, Afghanistan, and beyond in the whole third world after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Afghan puppet President Ashraf Ghani was the accumulated form and face of the neoliberalism in the region in general, while specifically in Afghanistan. He was brought up, prepared, and nourished by imperialist educational institutions for a role he had to play for his patrons. He remained an employee of imperialist financial institutions, the World Bank, for a decade. He was head of the structural adjustment program in Russia for years. He was assigned an assignment patronizing madrasas, regional, we call them religious schools, the program for America in Pakistan for 5 years. He was made finance minister of puppet Karzai government to shape the Afghan economy on new liberal principles, a point of reference for other neighboring countries and for the whole world. At last, he was brought as president to exploit his expertise that how to fix a failed state by his theory, channelizing all the businesses to strengthen the failing state. His fairy tales tips were in vain, while the whole capitalist system is organically in severe recession and multi-dimensional decline. Due to decrease in rate of profit, the bankruptcy of financial institutions followed by sovereign defaults. Before COVID-19, there was an epic recession illustrating in almost less than 2% rate globally. Shrinking markets and crashing stock markets worldwide, which has aggravated by COVID-19 crisis with the demolished chain of supply and orders, anyhow, with the restoration in some segments of supply chain, there is a temporary hike in GDP growth in some sectors of the microeconomy, but still a double dip and more severe recession is on the way, approaching very fast. Unfortunately, Afghanistan is the target of American imperialism and her allies since then, when the working class and oppressed people of Afghanistan took the reins of their future in their own hands in a Bonapartist revolution in the country in April the spring of 1978 by toppling a clown and cruel stooge of imperialism, President Daud Khan, which the force of revolutionary comrades of the Afghan army, the peasants, small size of workers, and oppressed people tried to emancipate themselves from the chains of land owners, from the cruelty of religious and tribal leaders, and from the rotten traditions and brutal customs inherited for centuries. But America, with her allies, especially Saudi Wahhabis, Pakistani generals, Chinese chauvinistic reactionaries to Russian allies, and Irani mullahs, with their indigenous proxies, dipped the revolution in blood. Many months before the Russian invasion in December 1979 into Afghanistan, America started a covert operation with the name of Operation Cyclone with the help of Saudi and Pakistani ruling class. They created an alternate black economy depending on drugs like opium and the refined form of its heroin to take the war hybrid on the cost of ruining the lives of millions of people addicted to this curse. And at the same time, strengthening religious fundamentalism in the region. This nexus destroyed the whole fabrics of the Oriental society in Afghanistan and neighboring countries. Russian invasion and exit both posed a great danger to Afghan revolution. First, Soviet invasion provided a pretext to America and allies to launch full-scale war against revolution, and second, the Soviet untimely exit made a ground for imperialism to take control of the country, to reach Central Asian states, markets, as well as to exploit the mineral resources of Afghanistan and of the Central Asia. Comrade Ted Grant predicted in his then article that ultimately that untimely exit of Soviet forces will provide a space for imperialism and his creature fundamentalism to wage a war and kill every single educated and enlightened person in the same process, and the same process is going on till date. History doesn't repeat itself, but on a higher stage. Same repetition is taking place time and again in Afghanistan since 1992. American imperialism installed the Dollar Mujahideen, or so-called freedom fighters, in Kabul after the collapse of Afghan democratic regime. Dollar Mujahideen tried their best with the sophisticated weapons to topple the Afghan regime, but they failed with lots of casualties and defeats on all fronts. Afghan democratic government only collapsed when the Russian President Boris Yeltsin stopped economic help of the government. When Mujahideen came to power, they were inherently incapable of building any state or its institution, provide education or health facilities to the people. Instead, they fell in a chaotic small states of various lords. Then the Unocal, the 10th largest company of oil and gas of Texas, America, forwarded a project of a new fundamental Taliban against, with the help of Saudis and Pakistan, to reach to the oil and gas reserves of the Central Asian state Turkmenistan. Unocal established a consortium consist of Delta Oil Company of the then Saudi King Abdullah and Turkmen Gazprom of Turkmenistan. The project was sabotaged by the competing company Bridos by supporting the Taliban enemies, the Northern Alliance. With addition to the conflict, the inherent split of Taliban and fractional fights from a first day, as the Kabul was captured in 1996 by Taliban. Same incidents are happening again among the various fractions of Taliban fighter in aggravated form after 25 years now. In 2001, America again toppled Taliban government in an assault on Afghanistan with the installation of ex-dollar mujahideen on the Kabul throne with some cosmetic changes of dresses of the rulers and modern touches, and attributed Afghan fictitious nationalism to the old fundamentalist beasts. They raised the slogan of gender equality and women rights, which was confined to a couple of big cities, while the great majority of women lived in the Stone Age, while WikiLeaks, the WikiLeaks exposed that feminism was introduced by American to attract the European Union interest and favor. American found President Ashraf Ghani once wrote in his article soon after the evacuation of the Soviet army in 1989, the collapse of the Afghan puppet government, the Afghan Democratic Republican government he meant, is the matter of days. While the Afghan revolutionary government sustained for more than 3 years, he was unaware that he, the little clown, was forecasting his own disgraceful future and fate, ruined in the hands of brutal laws of history when a coward stomach cancer patient stole $169 million of people's money, fled without fighting to UAE, leaving behind a strong 300,000 army with the $80 billion of ammunition and logistics, make down the heads of the millions of pupils in shame. Many of whom, including some diplomats and army generals, expressed their feelings in articles and tweets. One can imagine the soul of the American imperialism in the yesterday's ceremony of 9/11. After 2 decades of war on terror and punishing the fake responsible of the incident, while the real culprits, the Saudis, Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra Front, etc., are still Americans' friend for repressing the oppressed and revolutionary movements in the Muslim world. Today's Afghanistan is once again under the rule of barbarism of Taliban militants. The state is collapsed. Its state and social institutions are vanished. Newly government is facing a great deflation due to stoppage of the cycle of currency and closed banks. Some international monitoring institutions have analyzed that in coming weeks, 97% of the population will fall under the poverty line in Afghanistan. While at the other hand, Taliban militants have no program for any betterment of the society, economy, healthcare, or education. They do not have skilled experts to build the state and social institutions. Neither they have any kind of expertise to reduce the pain and curse of the people. Taliban militants have almost controlled the whole country, eradicating the threats of disintegration of the ancient country. The plan of Rashid Dostum and Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan once had is evaporate in the air. Taliban are not an unity, but distributed internally in various fractions, and they are split in 2 main fractions, coordinating with Qatar serving the West, while the other one is subjugated to Pakistan, which is anticipating Chinese and Russian help in solving their problems. The positive aspect of the phenomenon is defines of the women and youth, whose slogans will echo in the society and will become a stronger voice, which will have the power to attract the vast layers of the people to liberate them from such barbarism. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you very much, comrade. A really enlightening introduction. Comrade Farouk, are you here? Farouk Sureria.
Yes, yes.
You're next. Thank you, comrade.
Thank you very much. Comrades, I will briefly speak about 5 points. One, there has been this debate about why this, the so-called Afghan government collapsed so quickly along with its military apparatus. I will speak about the position of some of the anti-imperialists who are celebrating the Taliban victory, how we as left in Pakistan and Afghanistan, even India, we have viewed it. Then very related to it, the Orientalistic kind of discourses, starting with President Biden and onwards in the Western media. I will mainly speak about the resistance that has come up inside Afghanistan and internationally in the Afghan diaspora. And finally, what kind of demands we should be raising as the left, and what should we be doing. Okay, first of all, the collapse. I will very briefly speak about it because this is a whole debate. I have written an article 2 years ago where my perspective goes a bit wrong, but the analysis about occupation remains very valid. The thing is, the whole political and military structure that was built after 9/11 in Afghanistan, it was aimed at sustaining the occupation. It was not aimed at building the state there. It was not aimed at empowering the civil society there. And all the talk about women rights and all that, the justifications that were offered at the time. For instance, 6,000 to 9,000 Afghan soldiers have been killed in this war last 20 years. And when we say that the army just collapsed, we are actually in a way behaving in a very imperialist and orientalistic manner as well. The thing is, these soldiers were used as guinea pigs by the NATO forces, by the US forces. So that's what we need to understand. Secondly, they turned Afghanistan into a neoliberal laboratory. And I mean literally neoliberal laboratory. The whole aid, the whole process of rebuilding, so-called rebuilding of Afghanistan was, handed down to the NGOs. The idea was, and there are documents, the idea was that NGOs will do the development because the states in third world are corrupt. What happened by 2010, 2011, some of the big NGOs, international NGOs involved in the so-called rebuilding, they held a public press conference in Kabul and they pointed out, look, the NGOs have been more corrupt than the state, any state in the world. And Afghanistan was declared the second most corrupt country by Transparency International, not to state that transparency is any good institution, but just as an indication. So from 2011-12 onwards, more money was funneled into the state apparatuses. In short, what I'm trying to say is that the whole military political setup that was put in place, it was aimed at sustaining the occupation. So the moment the occupation ends, the military and political facade created by the US occupation also collapsed. That's my understanding, that's my analysis of the situation. Secondly, very briefly, some of the left-wing people and scholars of the post-colonial, so-called post-colonial leaning, they have been celebrative of the Taliban victory. We in Pakistan, in India, I'm talking about the major mainstream parties in India, as well as some of the left groups in Afghanistan that I know of, including Rawa, Hambastagi, which is Solidarity, a couple of more left groups, which are basically splits from Hambastagi and old ALO, we have been saying the following, that this is a defeat of the Afghan people, the working classes, the women there. There is nothing to celebrate. One barbarism has been defeated. We welcome that, but we do not celebrate the little barbarism, because that is perhaps even more dangerous for the region that is there. So we do not own this victory as a sort of victory one could associate with in Cuba, in Vietnam, in other certain cases where imperialism was defeated. Another discourse that has emerged is very Orientalistic in the Western media, in Pakistani media. I'm not sure about Iran and some other countries of the region, but definitely Western media. Some of them I've been pointing out on my Facebook wall. But for instance, let's start with the US President, Joe Biden. What he's saying. Look, Afghans for the last 100 years, they have been fighting each other. There has never been a central government. There has never been democracy. You know, all kind of nonsense you can point out about Afghanistan is pointing out. Why? Because you are blaming the Afghan people. Look, we went there to modernize them. We wanted to bring enlightenment there and development, but they are Oriental people. They want to live with their religion. It's in their culture. It's in their religion. Fact of the matter is, Afghanistan, as Comrade Hamid was pointing out, the last time we had a revolution that declared itself Marxist revolution was in Afghanistan. This was the last Marxist revolution. Okay, and many of us in Pakistan, Afghanistan, we keep disagreeing with each other whether it was a revolutionary coup or a revolution, but that's a separate debate. I'm not going into that. What I'm pointing out is that this terrible destruction of the Afghan history is very Orientalistic. It is aimed at, blaming Afghan people for the imperialist defeat. We should be aware of it. Hence, both this anti-imperialist, so-called anti-imperialist position of celebrating Taliban and this Orientalism, they are very dangerous. We should oppose it. And I'll come to that in a while. What I really want to focus today is the resistance. It was within 24 hours, within 24 hours of the Taliban occupation of Kabul, 5 brave girls in their mid-20s, almost all of them university students, they held a demonstration outside of the presidential palace in Kabul. You might have seen a video, many in Pakistan, and perhaps some in Kabul and elsewhere. They pointed out, look, this is all a conspiracy. Taliban just staged this demo to have a more, humanistic face for themselves. I just happen to know one of the girls, the key organizer, Sudaba. I've done an interview with her, which was banned by Facebook from many websites. Perhaps it is still available on the website of Green Left Weekly, Australia. Then we had Yom Istiqlal. On 15th, they occupy Kabul and by and large the entire Afghanistan. 19th happened to be the National Day of Afghanistan. A national day they have been celebrating since 1920 as a celebration of national liberation from British colonialism. Only a few years in the 1990s when Taliban were in power, this day was not celebrated, but it has been celebrated by the communists, by Dawood, by Zahir Shah and all the previous governments, starting with Amanullah Khan, who was a progressive king. On that day, there were demonstrations in many cities and hugely repressive measures by the Taliban. 3 youth were killed in Jalalabad. 16, the reports are unverified, but if we go by the Twitter accounts and so on from Afghanistan. 16 were killed in Asadabad. And these youth were protesting against the Taliban action of banning the traditional Afghan flag. Actually, it's not really traditional, but okay. And more importantly, last week, and that day you had a demonstration in Kabul as well, where you had 7 girls participating, and one of them, Crystal, she had a video interview hosted by New York Times, and it went viral. But most importantly, last week, Monday evening, perhaps hundreds or maybe thousands of young people, they came out in the middle of the night rather, so that it's a rather a question of security, they are not identified. They started chanting against Taliban, and also the Allahu Akbar, God is great, which was actually a resistance slogan before Taliban took over across Afghanistan. Ever since, every day, in dozens of cities across Afghanistan, there have been women coming out protesting against Taliban. I mean, what was started by these 5 girls on 17th of August has now spread across Afghanistan. You might have seen some of the video footages. One of our comrades, Imran, he rightly pointed out on his Facebook that the most brave, the most courageous chapter of women's struggle is being written in Afghanistan right now. And you know what is so impressive about their struggle, that they have forced the Taliban, for first time in their history, that they are staging women rallies now. You might have seen, it was reported on Swedish TV as well yesterday as well. I think it went global news. They organized a meeting of so-called women in very strange kind of burqas in University of Education meeting hall, and then a rally of women clad in burqa. Many say that from Afghanistan, that many inside burqa were actually Taliban men, and in other case, the women were forced to wear this burqa and attend this conference. What I'm pointing out is that initially they were trying to scare away the women who were protesting. There was propaganda against them that they are small, tiny groups of westernized women. But, you know, they are so scared now that they have to stage counter rallies, because they know these small groups of women, they are representative of the larger hatred of the Taliban. And over and over again, there have been studies in Afghanistan. I just quote one by the Asia Foundation. It pointed out, it was conducted for many years on annual basis. During the Doha deal, when it was going on, the negotiations were going on, 90%, to be exact, 88% of the Afghan people, they wanted the women rights defended in the Doha deal. And I have never seen, I haven't been to many countries, but every time I speak about Afghanistan, I point out that I have not seen the thirst for education anywhere as high as in Afghanistan, but particularly among the Afghan women, small girls up to grown-up women. My own mother-in-law, she was about 60 when she started doing her education. She learned Persian, she's Pashtun. She did some schooling, now she can read and write. At Kabul University, before the Taliban, for last about 20 years, since there are not so many facilities, the lectures start at 5 in the morning and they go on till 10 in the evening, non-stop, because there are 80 to 90,000 students registered there of all ages. And over a period of time, because I've been monitoring this university and going there, I love the campus, and for many reasons I've been going there. Slowly, the number of women was more than the men actually in many faculties. So this resistance is something we need to count on and we need to help build. So lastly, very briefly, what should we do? And to outline and what is to be done. I think the most important thing right now is to build a global solidarity with the Afghan people. The kind of solidarity we witnessed before the Iraq war, when we had history's biggest demonstrations, although we couldn't stop the war, but definitely it set a very good example. We need that kind of solidarity with the people of Afghanistan. Secondly, we should not recognize the Taliban government, but we should ask for the help of the Afghan people. There is a humanitarian crisis. I'll speak more when there is a Q&A session. And about this demand because it triggers a lot of debate. However, what should not trigger any debate is the fact that we should do everything possible for the Afghan refugees. I am really thankful, and let me flag the excellent work done by Comrade Hamid himself, because 80 to 180 people from Afghanistan, children, women, old, young, they came to Quetta where he lives. And Afghan people are not legal anymore in Pakistan if they enter Pakistan. And Comrade Hamid was really generous. Some more friends there who really risked their jobs and many other things to help these Afghan refugees. Some of them comrades, including my own brother-in-law, and definitely some more comrades involved. I don't want to go into details for many reasons. That should be the key focus now of our struggle, rescuing the lives of our comrades and Afghan activists, even when we do not agree with them, helping Afghan refugees. We need solidarity work at so many levels. This is just one, but especially in Pakistan. Unfortunately, for the dirty propaganda of the state from both sides, actually, last 20 years, there has been a widespread hatred of the Afghan people in Afghanistan. And Pakistan is, of course, the most hated country in Afghanistan. This is a huge challenge for socialists in both countries and internationally as well. Also, we need to think about some of the new initiatives that I can discuss later on to save time. One initiative, my wife, who is from Afghanistan, she and some of her friends, we are trying to take is start a blog in English. As Comrade Hamid was pointing out as well, for whatever reasons, English and French and Spanish and Arabic, they are big and important languages. So we need many such initiatives, and also meetings like this, where we can come together and discuss and sort of present some forward moves so that we can build this solidarity which is badly needed. Thank you very much, comrades.
Thank you very much, Farouk. That's really given us a fascinating and unique insight into the situation. We'll move straight on and ask Comrade Aman, if you're ready to make your contribution now, please.
Sure, thank you. I think the two talks actually gave a very thorough view with regard to what is happening within Afghanistan. And let me just echo that. The protests which have been taking place in Afghanistan have been quite a few. They have been going on non-stop effectively, whether it was the case that they had it at night times, or whether it was the case of the day before yesterday where they actually marched through Kabul and the protests that were taking place. And also similarly, there are millions of Afghans outside Afghanistan. And the very, very first day, we had protests taking place of Afghan people in a variety of cities in Iran. And they were also effectively echoing what was said earlier, that there is no acceptance for Taliban. I think among those parties within Afghanistan, from the ones that I met, who actually were thinking that Taliban were the sort of savior, these were only, from what I have understood, a group of Maoists and a couple of splinters from them across the society, and I think across most of the people in Afghanistan, the protests against Taliban or initiations of Taliban has been going on from start. In fact, the number of people who have been held in Afghanistan and were chased by Taliban door to door are so many. And one of the first things that they did was any finding of any person who was considered to be from the left or activists from that point of view. Door-to-door searches have been going on, especially around Kabul. There is one thing which I thought probably is worth mentioning. I think that there is major difference, and I'm sure this has been discussed before. There's a major difference between what happened, for example, with regard to the time that US actually did lose a military war. In Afghanistan, it wasn't a military war. And I think the idea that US and NATO and allied forces were there in order to ensure that there would be state built there, everybody knew that is not the case. There was a puppet state, and the whole idea of that state was one thing, and that was to ensure the continuity of occupation and obviously the corruption which was going on non-stop among all of the strata of the ruling parties, whether in the state or outside it. There is one thing, and I think that is the big thing, and that is if you go back, the actual initial idea of withdrawal from Afghanistan did not come at Biden's time, but it came at Trump's time. And there were initial talks prior to that, from the time that even Omar was taken into Pakistan. The main issue, I think, which is probably of concern, in addition to the points that was said, I'm not talking in contradiction, but rather than actually adding the points further. The questions that are raised is this. The whole idea of US could be probably summed up in one way, and that is the actual competition with China and the move into Far East is number one for US at the moment. That's on one hand. On the second hand, Afghanistan is on the route of the Chinese Silk Road, and especially with the relation with Pakistan, Afghanistan is crucial to Chinese from the point of view of trade from the north or even towards Iran. Therefore, one of the issues was this, in terms of China's approach, the intention was one thing, and that is whatever happens internally is internal business. What we want to ensure is continuity, and the continuity they were after was effectively sought through both the state of Ashraf Ghani and that of the Taliban, which is very similar to what Iran did to a large extent. I think the issue is this, that the US was happy to, and NATO were happy to leave Afghanistan, provided what they consider to be as terrorists stays within Afghanistan. If that stays there, they have no issue with it. There was no problem. So the issue of democracy, rights, etc., was never an issue. The main question was that should the US actually leave, could they actually put an alternative acceptable to the variety of factions of bourgeoisie within Afghanistan? The idea was that Taliban was supposed to be one of those forces. What happened was the Taliban saw the vacuum and decided to go ahead faster than the others. That's what really happened in terms of the Taliban getting the power. There was no talk about the Taliban not sharing, for example, with even Ashraf Ghani and the rest. The question was, Taliban should not be on his own, and effectively Taliban sought that. And that was the big surprise of the expectation. So the fall is not the case that they didn't expect it. UK has publicly has said it, US has said it, they were expecting time before the collapse. So the question is the speed. It wasn't the case that that was not on the agenda. The other issue, which I think is also hugely important, is that to recognize the fact that the US has actually, and NATO has agreed that it doesn't matter how reactionary the ruling power is in Afghanistan, provided they stay within Afghanistan and do not decide to actually export or terror outside Afghanistan is acceptable, is a big issue. That issue is not limited to Afghanistan. That issue is also related to other countries in the region, namely Iraq. The idea of the Baghdad talk is a continuation of that. Could they actually have a grouping literally of different factions that could come to take the state, provided they actually manage to all the area. So there are repercussions. What I'm trying to say is the issue of Afghanistan is not an Afghan issue. The issue is much more international. Shape of the region, acceptability, the vacuum that would be in other places with the departure of US, the role that EU considers that it could play, and already we're seeing France doing this in Baghdad and similarly in Lebanon. Thirdly, the fact that this opening is there, it means a variety of reactionary forces see openings. And these openings means they have more power, more ability to actually carry out the backlash against the struggles which are taking place. And that is taking place across the region, from Tunisia, Lebanon, right across Iran and Afghanistan and Pakistan. So it is, the question is this, the shape is changing. I think if we had the New World Order making a change once, now we're seeing a different change. The acceptability of a variety of reactionary forces in power and the extent that they can actually work together and stay in power. And as I said, similar situation is happening in Iraq. Afghanistan's surprise was really the speed that this force did not accept it. And similar thing could happen in Baghdad. If one of the reactionary Daeshi forces or similar of the Iran-supported groups decide to actually take the power in advance and not wait for the others and not to accept companies and coordination with the others. That is the issue which is, I think, partly being taken into account. So the question is a wider one. The other issue from the point of view of the recognition of this should be understood from the other side. It is not just the US and NATO that makes the decision. What has happened is the changes. Over the past 20 years, at the same time since 1911, we've seen major changes in terms of growth of population, changes in the working class, a reasonable degree of change within the bourgeoisie in a variety of countries in the region. And also in Afghanistan, for specifically, as we're talking about that, in the past 20 years, we've had at least, or we could think about one generation that has not seen Taliban. One generation that did not see the rule of the Taliban. And this generation is not easily possible to put back into the position that they were, even compared to the generation before that had seen Taliban. It is this new generation, and that's why we see huge amount of young people in there. I think the idea that was mentioned absolutely is not holding any water, that as if women's rights were introduced by US, it isn't the case. This new generation, including women, and at the forefront at the moment there are women, and the protests are taking place everywhere, they are actually making or showing a change which was not there 20 odd years ago. And it is not because of the US occupation or NATO's occupation. This is because this generation has not only not seen Taliban, but because it has seen change, and the world has changed over the past 20 years, especially with the internet and everything else. By the way, Afghanistan is one of the major news media places in the whole region in terms of the number of TVs, number of reporting, etc., which are taking place in Afghanistan. Trained journalists are one of the known ones in the whole region. So it's not just effectively people living in villages. We're having a capitalist system, but huge amount of tribalism in the area as well. In this current scenario, we can see that other countries in the region, whether Iran, Pakistan, and all of the others, including Saudi Arabia and the rest, they are trying to actually make a show of this in order to actually increase their influence, not just because they're thinking about influence in Afghanistan, but because this is being considered to be a test case for other countries in the region as well. So we have got now a lot of competition, if you like, sometimes a little bit harsher than competition in terms of showing force. At the moment, a large amount of the US left tanks that were in Afghanistan have been transferred across the border to Iran. Islamic Republic has got quite a few of them in Iran. And the show of the convoys that were passed over, including the airplanes and tanks, were huge. And also we have got Saudis and Turkey, as was mentioned, trying to actually make some position there. Turkey was the first one who had said if the new government is going to be formed, they were going to guarantee the airport, and they were hoping on the role that they have with the tribes that had previous connections to Turkey. That did not materialize. So at the moment, we also had a scenario that soon as Pakistan tried to actually use force to help Taliban in the north in Panjshir, immediately we had the response from others, from Qatar and Saudis, and also from the Iran, of saying that Pakistan is trying to actually play dirty and is trying to actually intervene and get, if it can, some sort of a higher influence prior to anything else. Overall, the scenario is something which is, I think, very vibrant. On one hand, we have a struggle that is taking place in Afghanistan. Two, Taliban, as correctly said, Talib means a person who studies in a school or studying Islamic learning. That's called a Talib. Taliban means a grouping of them. So as a result, what we have with Taliban is not one unit, it's a huge amount of fraction. It's not one organization that decides. It's a huge number of different sections, from extreme ones, even Daesh, right down to the other soft level. I think the general media presence is trying to show that as if Taliban has changed. We can accept the new Taliban. The difference between the new Taliban and the old Taliban is that the new Taliban does not decide to blow up Twin Towers, but the old Taliban did. That's the picture which is being framed. And the idea of accepting Taliban as the representatives of the masses in Afghanistan is something that everybody in Afghanistan and everybody in the region, I think across the world, knows that is not correct. So not recognizing Afghanistan as a state, Taliban as a state, I think that's one issue. Recognition of the refugees. Right now, in one hand, US has transferred some of the Afghans across to Africa. Germany has said we've been very kind. UK brought some, and effectively we had even one person who brought 200 dogs across, and not even people. Norway took one plane and only had one person in it. Pakistan, to some extent, closed the border for some part. Iran closed this border. There was a lot of pressure. It opened the border. There's something like 700 to 800 Afghans traveling across towards Iran. The important point of recognition of them and acceptance of refugees, I think, is important. In Iran, we have now a general comment which is going across the social media and otherwise, that everybody says anybody who comes from Afghanistan are welcome here. So therefore, the whole idea is to allow the notion of Afghans are welcome is not just across Europe and other countries, but within the region as well. And the working that is being done with refugees or people who are moving from Afghanistan, I think is of huge importance. Last but not least, I think showing the fact that this change is something that we have to be aware of and we have to recognize. And I think it is an international change. The idea of an international change or a change of mood of what can or cannot happen means that currently every country does not need to get acceptance of US as it was the case before. Any reactionary force does have a chance to come to power unless right from the working class within the countries, in each one of them, the pressure against the rule of bourgeoisie continues. And that is the big thing. And I think there are good signs and bad signs. We can't just see everything as doom and gloom. There is also a lot of protest and a lot of open arms, I think, across the region, and a lot of solidarity deep down rather than between the states. And those are the main issues. What can be done? I think I quite agree. Recognition of Taliban should not be on the agenda. Ensuring that the idea of if the US military rule is not there, people cannot govern, so therefore they have to be there. The idea that everywhere the US role, which is diminished today in terms of military work, at least in the whole of the Middle East and in Afghanistan was a clear start of it. This is going to be a new issue. Vacuums are going to be created. China, Europe, etc. would try to get in. But our effective emphasis is on building the struggle, ensuring that the solidarity from the bottom up is actually there, and ensuring that we would be able to actually extend this by not only welcoming refugees, but by showing the solidarity in terms of action against every single bourgeoisie that we have in our own countries. And let me stop there. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Comrade Aman. Of course, the three contributions have given us really a unique insight into the situation, and I'm really, I feel it a privilege to be able to hear them. I know that this will have raised a number of questions and points of discussion and maybe of controversy, and I obviously we're expecting a lively discussion now, but before the discussion takes place, I'd like to say one thing. It's a source also of great pride to see how many comrades are here from maybe a dozen countries, including many comrades from the region, especially from Pakistan. And I'd like to say that you know, there are comrades here who we haven't seen for a long time, and there are also many comrades here that we haven't seen before at our meetings. You will not find anywhere else a forum, a genuine international forum like that we've been able to offer through WIN. Please take advantage of the opportunities that this offers. If you're not on our mailing list, please give us your email addresses. You can put it in the chat. If you like, you can just send it to me privately, and I'll put it on the on our weekly mailing list. We have weekly meetings. We've had the privilege, like we have here today, many times in relation to countries around the world. Real eyewitness on the spot reports from comrades who are active in the working class struggle and the workers movement. So this is, I think, a precious facility and a precious asset, which I hope we can all make the maximum use of. Now, we'll take questions and discussion. I think what we'll do is, if you have a question, unless it's a very short, simple question which requires a direct answer, I'd ask the speaker comrades not to reply to them now, but to wait till the end when they'll have a chance to sum up the discussion. So questions and discussion, the forum is open to you now, please, comrades. Silvana from Brazil.
Hi, I'm sorry that I haven't been present for the last few weeks. I am concerned about women's situation in Afghanistan. I didn't really understand the difference between the Taliban now and the Taliban from 20 years ago, if he could explain a little bit better. And I saw like the women that were in the manifestation last 3 days ago, they were whipped by the Taliban. So I really hope that women can be the front of this new revolution in Afghanistan. Thank you.
Matt.
Hi, comrades. Thanks. Very useful contributions. It's you know, one of these great positions in which you clearly, as Roger said, we get to speak to people who actually participate in site, which is not something we frequently get the chance, particularly Marxists. I mean, we can speak to, obviously we have, I mean, I'm from Scotland, we have Afghan refugees, but we have a shortage of Marxist Afghans or Marxists in the region, so it's very precious to us. I think, I mean, the one thing you can see here is fear from the ruling class, and you can feel it. I mean, even here in the imperialist countries, you can feel the fear of the work of the ruling class as that system it is built and operated over the past decades, and particularly since the Second World War, is now clearly in decay, and clearly they are losing control. The point of they are losing control of sections of the world. I mean, you know, having walked in and then having to flee out of them it actually reduces them to really very to a very problematic point. And we can clearly see this also in course of their defence of countries like Israel, which they see as being their bulwarks in the Middle East and so on. And this is why also they will act against the left, both here and of course elsewhere, and they are doing so. I think there's a few questions. I mean, first of all, I think that obviously you've got what is clearly a developing crisis. I mean, I think from what comrades have said and what's been reported is that the Taliban regime is not solid and is not in a position to establish itself. It does not have popular support, or it has popular opposition in much of the country. It is facing a position in which, clearly the currency is about to collapse or will collapse. People will go short of food. The basic questions are going to be asked in Afghanistan, and the Taliban have no answers. And so I don't see it as being a stable regime in the slightest. And once again, the question is then asked, okay, what forces are able to raise serious points in terms of how the society should be run and so on and so forth. So it's really also the question, comrade, in terms of the state of the organised working class, and what is it like in terms of you said there's been development of the working class, which is what we'd expect in the last 20 years. But I mean, is it organised? Is it are there groups and so on and so forth? The other question I think is about the Chinese intervention, because clearly the Chinese see the opportunity of the retreat of the Americans, and the fact that obviously they already have a strategic deal with the Pakistanis and in terms of taking over at least one port, and that they would wish to incorporate sections of Afghanistan into what they're doing regionally and more strategically. And the question is then, okay, what is the program of the Chinese state and bureaucracy in Afghanistan, and how does that sit with the current state, and how will that impact any regionally and in terms of the working class and the broader population? Well, obviously it's a difficult position for the Chinese bureaucracy to be in as well. I mean, they don't want to deal with, they've done a deal, but obviously it's a very unstable one, and I can quite see that I mean, I know there's been resistance in Pakistan to the Chinese efforts, but it would just be interesting to see what comrades think in terms of, because that's the one, if you like, the one force that can intervene in terms of regionally, has the facility to do so and the base to do so, and therefore could actually make a difference, particularly under conditions, as I say, in terms of a growth crisis. This is not a stable situation at all. Thanks.
Right, thank you, Matt. Next, we'll have Steve Zeltzer from USA, followed by Sarah Rapala from Sri Lanka, followed by John Ryman, also from the USA. Thank you.
So I think it is a defeat, obviously, for U.S. imperialism, and the United States, has been weakened tremendously as a result of this. And the question for the working class is what were the causes of this, and how can the working class of the United States fight against U.S. imperialist interventions and expand the support of workers around the world. I think that unfortunately, the left in the United States has been completely silent, other than having articles about the need to fight for the shutdown of all U.S. military bases, 800 bases around the world, and withdrawal of U.S. troops around the world. And I think that is, I think we need an united international campaign to shut down U.S. imperialism, to expand this. And the role of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party is that they want to keep their forces around the world. They have this over the horizon. which means they will continue to bomb using drones and other forces in the Middle East. So I think we need an international campaign. I agree that we need to unite with the Afghani workers, the women who are fighting this oppression. And I think there are large numbers of Afghanis who are probably angry and disgusted by US imperialism, leaving them in the lurch. So I think that there's a basis of working with Afghani militants who want to struggle for a different society in Afghanistan and against the Taliban and other reactionary forces. And the other question is China, because this is a victory, in a way, in my view, of China and Russia and their ability to make deals. And they will support the Taliban government, the Chinese, as they've supported other reactionary governments around the world. So I think that we need to have a perspective towards the defense of the Afghani people, workers, and also against the support that they will get from China, because I think China wants to fill the role in a different way, though, of the United States in Afghanistan. And of course, the struggle for the resources, the natural resources of Afghan, which China is interested in getting. So I think those are some important questions. We had a rally in San Francisco, which is, I understand, the only rally in the United States calling for the withdrawal of all US troops. But I think politically in the United States and in the unions, the fight against war, imperialist war, the fight against US military intervention around the world there's an opportunity now, and workers are asking what happened? Why did this happen? Why did it go on for 21 years? And why is it continuing to go on? So I think that's a political task, and I would like to see international action globally against US bases around the world and the withdrawal of US troops. I think that's important internationally for the working class. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you, Steve. Saranapala from Sri Lanka.
Comrade, I wanted to get clarifications. I think Comrade Matt and Steve gave some clarifications about China, because suddenly after the withdrawal, the US forward and offer the support, and what it colors, I like to get some understand the Chinese role within the Afghan, Afghan conflict. So, can you explain one of comrade on this? That.
Thank you,
Yeah,
John
this
Ryman.
is my question.
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry. Yep. Thank you, John Ryman, USA.
Thank you. So, first of all, just on a side comment, I'd like to comment on what Farouk Suleria said about some left in the US and Europe giving some sort of support to the Taliban. And it's an example of the absolutely disastrous state of the left, because, I mean, this is part and parcel of the widespread, far wider spread support for Assad in Syria. And also, for instance, you have Code Pink, which is the largest so-called peace group here in the United States, which supports the Iranian dictatorship. So it really shows the disastrous state of the left. The main thing I wanted to comment, I've been reading everything I could about Afghanistan, and I came across this book by this guy, Anand Gopal. And what he did back in the years between about 2002 and 2010, he just spent years in Afghanistan, traveling mainly to the rural areas, but throughout Afghanistan, and just spending his time talking with all kinds of different people, from so-called warlords, which he says in Afghanistan are really, they call them commanders, military commanders, to housewives and so on. And he explained it, his book, I mean, it's such a stunning proof of the theory of permanent revolution that, I mean, I'm sure he didn't set out for it to be that, but it is. And he explains why no strong central state was able to develop in Afghanistan. Also, incidentally, it's really confirms the theories of Engels in the origin of the family, that it was the ownership of the private development of private property that was the basis for oppression of women. And that's certainly, I think, the case in Afghanistan. And my God, the capitalist class that he describes as having developed there. Oh, well, first of all, Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution explains that no capitalist class in the former colonial world can develop independent of imperial powers. And he explains, he very clearly shows how the Taliban are not a truly nationalist force, that they're reliant on the one hand on Pakistani capitalism, in particular the ISI, and on the other hand, on a layer of the Arab bourgeoisie. But the other wing of the capitalist class that developed really linked with US imperialism, they're just a giant group of protection racketeers. And I want to just read one quote. He met with this guy, Zamani, who was one of the, he was linked with the US military, supposedly providing them information and so on. And here's quoting Zamani. Zamani says, "This whole land is filled with thieves and liars. This is what you Americans have made. I know this game. I know how to survive. I went to the Americans and said, I can find bin Laden. I told them, give me $5 million and I'll bring you his head. So they went and talked to their bosses and arranged it. And I got $5 million from them. Then I went to Al-Qaeda and I told them, give me $1 million or I'll turn you over to the Americans. So they gave me, this was, if you remember, there was the Battle of Tora Bora, where the US was attacking bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 years ago. So they gave me $1 million and I convinced the Americans to stop bombing for a little while. I told them we could use the time to find Osama, but really it was so those Arab dogs could escape to Pakistan. Then I went to the ISI, the Pakistan Intelligence Agency, and said, give me $500,000 and I'll give you Al-Qaeda. They pulled a gun and told me to get out of their face. Zaman laughed. You see, they don't play this game. You can't buy them. And I knew when I was reading this, I knew exactly what was going to happen. And sure enough, 2 paragraphs down, Gopal describes that Zaman got killed by a suicide bomber. And what happened was, because the United States could not do what they did in Vietnam and just send in hundreds of thousands of troops, they couldn't do it for domestic reasons. They had to depend on this whole layer of informants and so on. And for instance, if they had, who was going to build their military bases? It was this layer. Who was going to provide them with supplies and protect the truck convoys that were going from, let's say, Kandahar to some Air Force base? It was this layer, and some of them were charging $1,000 to $2,000 per truck to get these convoys through. They were charging the truck drivers. At the same time, then what they did, if another one of these warlords or commanders was developing his own links, and it was always his own links with the US and was a potential financial and economic threat, they would go to the US and say, hey, look, that guy's Taliban. And they'd have that guy arrested and likely is not shipped off to Guantanamo. Also, then they use their position to start to steal land, either from their fellow landlords or also from peasants. Also, they use their position. Another book talks about the transport mafia linked up with the drug smugglers. So this was the type of capitalist class that US imperialism and European imperialism through NATO, this was the type of capitalist class that they were developing there. And it's kind of like the paradigm or the dynamics on steroids of the permanent revolution, the theory of the permanent revolution linked with the degeneration of capitalism in the 21st century, the two of them combined. Now, the question to me, and which seems to be foremost, you know, Afghanistan is one of the very few countries in the world where the great majority of the population is rural, and it has a very small proletariat. And so it seems to me also, with capitalism being unable to unite the whole nation because of the extreme ethnic tribal divisions, how can the situation be resolved? And it seems to me, and I'd be interested in hearing the comrades, especially Aman from Iran, hear their views, that it has to be resolved on a regional basis. And in particular, you have one powerful working class that's in motion there. That's the Iranian working class. And it would seem to me that they would have an extremely potentially important role to play throughout the region, including in particular in Afghanistan, and would have to be linked directly with the question, number one, the national question, and I mean this directly and openly, and number two, the question of women's liberation.
Oh, it's John. Yes, I just wanted to ask one
Sorry,
question.
John from Britain. Thank you.
I think John Ryman has partially answered it, but I'd like to ask one question. Who are these NGOs we keep hearing about? In this country, you think of NGOs as being Save the Children or the Red Cross, etc. But in Afghanistan, they seem to have developed a very sinister role, which doesn't quite fit in with, if you like, the charities that, you know, I've just mentioned. So could somebody explain who the NGOs are and who's financing them? I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, John. Yes, next I've got Leslie from Britain.
Yeah, just tremendous inspiring contributions from the comrades. And obviously we've seen the total failure of world capitalism to develop any economic and social conditions in Afghanistan. It was really heartening to hear about how widespread the protests of women and young people are. And obviously the poorest in Afghan society have, including women, have been used and abused for many years by landlords, warlords, Taliban, a whole variety of invaders. So I've got a couple of questions. It was interesting what Farouk said about the real thirst for education. I think many of us have had the impression in the West that the gains in education have been more limited to women in the cities and more middle class women, and hearing the contribution, I'm not sure how true that is or not. And another question, which has been partly answered by Farouk again, is about the links with the Pakistani comrades, especially with Afghan people. Obviously, personal links there, but how can we further develop these links and solidarity in our different parts of the world? And obviously that includes the issue of Iran, because given the circumstances there, although the workers are on the move, again, it's very difficult to make practical and open links. So I'd be interested in maybe some further comment from Aman about that as well. So thank you, comrades, very much for your contribution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Leslie. I'm calling Adam next. Adam, could you introduce yourself? I'm not sure where you're from.
Good morning, comrades. My name is Adam Schulz. I'm a member of the International Socialism Project in Chicago. I wanted to make 2 points. Firstly, I think we have to be cautious on the scale of US imperialism's defeat. I think we should see it as a setback, but I don't see it as a historic defeat for the following reasons, 4 of them. Number one, imperialism did not, US imperialism did not enter Afghanistan in 2001 for classic imperialist reasons, the seizure of raw materials, the need to get markets. It entered for political revenge following 9/11. It's rather different than classic imperialism. Secondly, the scale of the military defeat. It's not like Waterloo or Stalingrad, where a huge army stumbled black, bloody, like Napoleon's battle for Moscow. It's more like the British in Kenya with the Mau Mau rebellion in the 50s, where the imperialists were not able to get their wishes, but you can't say they really came back smashed and bloodied. Thirdly, US imperialism will be able to continue to function on a world scale, unimpeded. After Vietnam, both the domestic Vietnam syndrome and a reluctance to intervene hampered the US on a world scale. For example, they weren't able to intervene when the Cubans aided the MPA in Angola in 1976. 1 year later, they had to essentially watch that. So this won't be like that. This won't stop their intervening. Fourthly, rather, and finally, Afghanistan is not a crucial location for America. Now, having said that, saying it's a setback does not mean it's nothing, does not mean it's zero. We don't have to say it's the exact opposite of historic defeat. It's a setback. It's particularly a setback for the reasons comrades have said so well, of the rivalry with China, that China will, particularly be able to go with the Belt and Road Initiative through Afghanistan, and for the US not to have a strategic area near what's going to be its main rival in the 21st century, that is China. My second and final point is building on what John Ryman from Oakland said. That is the question of a regional perspective. What will be Afghanistan obviously has a very weak working class. What will be the unit of revolution will not be Afghanistan as a country, but will be the broader subcontinent, bringing into play the Pakistani and the very powerful Indian proletariat. I come out of the Fourth International tradition, where we put it a bit flamboyantly or exuberantly for a red subcontinent. Many of the comrades on this call, I think, come out of the militant tradition that put it for a united socialist Middle East, united socialist subcontinent. It seems to me that perspective of a regional revolution, of a united socialist subcontinent, bringing in the strength of the Indian proletariat and how the Indian proletariat can pull behind it, not just other oppressed groups in India, because it's a centralized, organized, cohesive, collective force, but can pull in other elements in the region, such as the oppressed in Afghanistan, is a very relevant one. Thank you, comrades.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adam. Useful points. I'm calling on David now from South Africa originally, and from America now. Okay.
Thanks, Roger. But even more thanks to the comrades, particularly, those who are right on the border or have had direct experience. The whole, all the issues come alive when you listen to you. And I hope we who, maybe feel a little more fluent in English are not dominating you. And please, please put your hands up too. We'd love to hear from a wider range on a number of issues. I'd like to make 5 points, if I may. First of all, this is a critical point at which we can look at the balance of forces internationally, because there's no doubt that America has had a defeat. American imperialism has had to retreat, and it's astonishing how, what can I say, how humiliating at points that defeat has been. On the other hand, you know, I'm in a small town in America and no one talks about it at all. It's not even a matter for discussion. Not even 9/11, which happened yesterday, is a matter for discussion at all among extended family and the rest. So these things seem very far away from the American heartland. And in a way that insulates Biden, who's not under huge pressures at the moment. I just raise that because the politics, we need to be quite clear about the politics. The politics right now in American politics is not that there's a sense of defeat, rather that a mistake was made and we'll make some kind of turn and leave it to the politicians, they'll do something. Now, American imperialism is deeply irrational. I think we need to face this fact. Although the most intelligent wings of the ruling class here are thinking through the balance of interests in any particular point, and there are many theories out there about how they should conduct their foreign policy. There's zigzags, there are defeats, there's every possible permutation on the cards, which is not rational. Sometimes, as Adam has said, they go in purely for political revenge. And even then, they cannot define what that revenge will be, because they overstayed, so many strategists have said, they have overstayed their initial strategy, which was to get bin Laden and to smash Al-Qaeda. And yet that all happened, and yet they still stayed on and stayed on. And that has actually led to a spiraling set of problems, which now they've had to pull the plug on and to retreat with some humiliation. So they couldn't define the objective. Even when they felt they'd achieved their objective, there seems to be a certain momentum in imperialism, that once you've established a sort of stronghold, you build on it and extend it, as happened in Iraq, even though it's actually spiraling downwards and actually they're losing. And then you can have very impetuous things, incidents such as Indonesia in 1965, organizing with the military there to have a massacre of 1 million left-wingers, socialists, trade unionists, liberals, anyone who was left of the extreme right. That's what was done. Of course, they've denied it 100 times, but that's how American goes, at the same time proclaiming democracy everywhere they go. And if we know from, anyone from South Africa will tell you, America's never stood against apartheid and for democracy in South Africa. In fact, they sold out on leading people in the underground so that the security police in South Africa could arrest Nelson Mandela and the like. So they've always been on the side of reaction. And yet Biden has launched a campaign that is going to be his trademark to say that he's standing for the defense of democracy internationally. But right now, I've said that they're not doing that. He's actually denounced that idea recently. So there's a tangle of confusion about American imperialist interests abroad, and we will see all kinds of strange things. Now, this does create a vacuum. A number of comrades have mentioned this, and that we're looking to see, what's going to happen in Iran. Is China going to intervene and the like? The second point I'd like to make is the weakness of the state. Because the Americans defined the objective they had as purely military, they tried to build up an Afghan military, but they couldn't constitute a political center. The bourgeoisie was too weak to be able to stand on its own 2 feet. John has mentioned the treacherous nature of that bourgeoisie. And so the entire bureaucracy and the entire political leadership depended on handouts from America. And actually, in the end, the Taliban has actually benefited from that because they've taxed all kinds of projects. Someone, I think it was John, raised the question about these NGOs. They're funded largely by American money, But of course, they're doing important work, such as educating young girls, providing food for needy families and the like, because they're trying to show the depth of American, shall we say, efforts to stabilize the regime. And the Taliban is in a sense going to have to come back, because they used to get a share of something like 50% or more of these projects. And they, that's going to be something that America is going to be offering them. And they're going to, it seems as though some deals will be made in the end, which will lead to a treacherous recognition. I predict that they will in the end recognize the Taliban government, despite whatever they say that they're doing right now. The amount of money flowing, we mentioned the 3 trillion. Just remember that most of that 3 trillion came right back to America. It was actually a transfer within Washington from the state to multinational corporations and contractors on a massive scale. So massive that they had to have a special auditor general dedicated to Afghanistan to find out what on earth happened to their money. And that was 10 years ago. And just billions literally disappeared without trace. And they didn't know what is happening. That's the very opposite of efficiency on the part of American capitalism. But that was a catastrophic state. In other words, they can't constitute a political center. Because they couldn't constitute a political center, they couldn't really give political leadership to the army, which were until the last year or two was actually led by the Americans and NATO when they went into battle. They didn't design their own battle strategies. The third point is about the nature of the Taliban. I think the comrades have raised the fact that this is the most reactionary movement which has come to power. Some estimates in terms of surveys made before the Taliban have come to power indicate that they command about 10% of the population support. So how did they have such a stunning victory as just almost walking from city to city, taking over? Because they had the support of Pakistan, and they had support in certain strata and they allowed the decentralization of control to allow youth just to march into the cities and to take it. And of course, the state knew that in the end there'd be treachery from above, and that is proven, and that they would just die and be slaughtered without any cause, and they wanted their families to survive. So we're now looking to see what character. Everyone is debating the character of a Taliban government, and already they've answered it. They've put in, I think, 6 people in the government now are on the international wanted list for participation in one or the other in the attack on the World Trade Center. So some of them have one of them particularly was released from Guantanamo. So America has tried its very best. It set out the objective of breaking al-Qaeda and the network, which led to 9/11. And the humiliation at the moment is amazing, although it's almost neutral because no one's mentioning it, that these very people who had planned the attack on the World Trade Center are now in fact in government in Afghanistan. We're seeing an outpouring of violence against women. We've heard about the demonstrations. On the other hand, we've seen the terrible beating that journalists have had, so much so that they've all ended up, 2 of those journalists who reported on the demonstrations are now in hospital, and that women are here now in interviews, are allowed to go back to practice as nurses, for instance, but not to touch a man or not to be involved in any discussion whatsoever with males in the hospital. And that is a catastrophic setback, for women, which we do not celebrate. In fact, we denigrate and we fight against that. So we find now, the 4th point I'd make is that there is a spreading now, in a sense, someone mentioned about 10 jihadist movements. And we see that throughout Africa at the moment, there's a rise of jihadism. Some people say, well, it's just the name that people are taking, but the practice is of beheading people on large scale, massacring villages and the like, all in the name of religion. So it is a trend which we could see something similar in Africa, where the states are absolutely rotten. The troops are not paid. The bureaucracy has got billions and taking even more. It's something similar to the government in Afghanistan, and is now being threatened, as in Mozambique and in West Africa, by a rising mood from below, not necessarily support from jihadism. The point made about the Taliban is if you can have a minority which is well structured, has a tight ideology, and has enough access to arms, you can dominate an area and establish a base of power and actually fight against a very rotten military and even have success. The last point I'd like to make is in relation to the role of the Chinese bureaucracy. It's very evident right now that the Taliban government is not committed. It doesn't even have a concept of the military. It has no concept of a health system or an education system or anything else. It's just the doctor no on everything. It cannot say yes to anything which is progressive. This opens, in a sense, an opportunity for the Chinese bureaucracy with its advanced technology in terms of controlling and spying and using artificial intelligence to track people's conversations, to be able to build a dictatorship, to turn the Taliban from a ramshackle movement into a dictatorship of some note. And I want to ask whether that's actually, on the cards. The last point I'd like to make just in relation to that is that the talk that we've heard, the spelling out of how women are attending universities and prepared to go at 5 o'clock in the morning and to stay up till 10 o'clock at night is truly inspiring. And it does show that the youth, women, and sections of the working people are really determined to fight. Many say to fight to the death right now to be able to eliminate the Taliban and the forces of reaction, in that region. It reminds me a little of the mood I had when I was teaching in Dar es Salaam, where people were prepared to, everyone put their name on a desk or on a place at the library. They were so determined they were going to be able to sit and actually read books in quiet and be able to study. It's a marvelous attitude, and we do need to give everything we can to support the education and the political education of that strata. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And we have one more comrade who's indicated they want to speak. That's Comrade Jim from Britain. If there's any other comrades who want to speak, it'll have to be fairly brief now. Please, raise your hand. Otherwise, Jim will be the last speaker before we get the replies from the other comrades. Jim.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I thank in particular the three main speakers at the beginning? I thought it was absolutely brilliant contributions, and also obviously a number of the points. It really, as David just said, really kind of lifts it and makes it come to life, certainly for people such as myself in Britain. I just want to make a comment on a couple of points people have made, and then just some questions really to ask. Personally, I think this is an historic defeat for Western imperialism. I mean, it crystallizes a long, drawn-out weakness that we have seen over decades. And it's a parallel with the Soviet Union's defeat, also in Afghanistan, which was a factor in the collapse of the Soviet Union. What I know Adam in particular said, well, it's not classic imperialism. Imperialism can intervene, I think, for many different reasons, and so on, and revenge is one of them. I think the parallel with Kenya that he mentioned, I would disagree with, I have to say. I mean, what happened, of course, in Kenya after the Kikuyu rebellion over land theft was that the British did a deal with the Kikuyu leaders and handed over power so they could maintain their influence, even to the extent of sending in military to support a post-independence government when it was threatened by the local military coup. There's nothing like that in Afghanistan. The imperialists are scrabbling for influence, it seems to me. And I don't think there's any appetite in the West for future intervention in such countries. I mean, we've seen in Britain of headlines of they died in vain in terms of the hundreds of troops that went to Afghanistan. And it seems to me that imperialism now, Western imperialism, can no longer establish a great stability in a whole range across the world, which was able to do post-Second World War in Germany and Japan for a lot of the reasons, particularly that have been mentioned by John and by others. And the weakness of the bourgeoisie in those countries means that as one of the speakers pointed out, that essentially Western imperialism is having to react and accept reactionary regimes which they can't control, but they nevertheless have to accept as long as they have repressive actions within their own countries to bring greater stability. Obviously, American imperialism isn't finished. It will, it's not over, but I think it's been greatly damaged by what has happened in the last month, and it will reorientate and so on, and judge. And you look at British imperialism, it's sending its aircraft carrier around the world and so on as a sign of impotence, really. When you do that, and it can't actually organize an airlift properly in Afghanistan. The points that were made, I think, about and the hope and the support for seeds of opposition for the Taliban, I'd wonder if in their concluding remarks, some of the speakers could develop this a little bit more. And also the question of the regional powers. It seems to me the regional powers do not want instability in Afghanistan, but they also do not want a strong Afghan centralized government in any sense as a rival. And so we've seen the regional jostling of power. And I'd be very interested to see what people think of the impact that will have in developments within both Pakistan and Iran of the developments in Afghanistan. And the point that David and others have made about China and the intervention, I think, are very pertinent. But there is also a question I'd like to ask, which is that, of course, China has massive suppression of its own Muslim population, of the Uyghurs. And how are the different factions in the Taliban going to respond to that? Are they going to ignore it, or is that an Achilles heel in terms of Islamic solidarity? And so my final question is I'd be very interested if people have perspectives on what they think the situation will be over the 6, 9 months, a year, a couple of years and so on, within Afghanistan itself and the developments, but also with the regional powers and so on in the area and the impact that will have with them and the wider geopolitical things. But finally, thank you very much. It's been a very illuminating talk this afternoon.
Right. Thank you, Jim. I completely agree with that. It's been an absolutely superb discussion. And I'm going to ask the speakers to respond. I think if it's okay with them, I think in reverse order. So Aman, Farouk, and then Hamid, if that's okay. And if you could try to limit your response to maximum 5 minutes each. I would just want to make one very quick point before you reply. I think that the point that Adam raised, one of the points that Adam raised is of crucial significance, and that's the regional context. The slogan and the objective of a socialist federation of the region is, I think, of something which we have to put foremost, not just on our in relation to our understanding, but our program as well. We have many comrades here from Pakistan. We have comrades here from Sri Lanka. We have comrades here, I think, from Bangladesh too. We have to actively pursue the building of links throughout the subcontinent. Of course, it's difficult in the present conditions in Afghanistan itself. But as Adam said, the enormous power and strength and militancy and cohesion of the Indian proletariat is a factor which we must always put to the forefront. We've had a situation which we mentioned many times, but a situation in the last 3 or 4 years where 3 times we had the biggest demonstrations, the biggest strikes in working class history on a world scale. Strikes of 35 crore, 350 million, 250 million, 25 crore that participated, including one only about a year ago. We had the siege of the capital city by 300,000, 3 lakh farmers. We've had just incredible displays of strength. And what is lacking is the political leadership and the political concentration to be able to give that a program and to take that movement to fruition. And it is not just a regional, it's an internationalist task which is on the agenda of all the comrades, all of us here, and particularly the comrades in the region. And I would also just like to make a final appeal. Comrades who are not on our mailing list, please take this opportunity, either through the contacts that you made already that got you here, but also by giving me your email address. You can address it to me privately if you like, or in the chat. Some comrades have done that already, but I hope other comrades will too. We have meetings like this every week, and equally, they've given us an absolutely unique and irreplaceable perspective and insight into the revolution as it's developing on a global scale. So first I'll ask Comrade Aman, are you ready?
Yes, thank you, Roger. As you said, a lot of good points were made, and I actually definitely benefited from them. In 5 minutes, I think all I can do is just answer or mention a couple of points very, very briefly. Let me re-emphasize. I think the issue is not, as I mentioned, is a major issue, and I think not only for the people in the region but across the world. The situation of what has happened with the US, irrespective of how we define it, puts a lot of points on the agenda of the comrades with regard to US, and similarly with the other NATO countries. This position of the change, or if you like, not only in the politics, but of the, I think to a larger scale, the end of the notion of military answers to the Middle East and the war-like atmosphere in the whole area. I think that actually has repercussions not only in the region but for all the comrades everywhere. One point which was mentioned with regard to the situation, I think also from the point of view of the situation. For example, I'll just give you a couple of examples of what we have been seeing in Iran, which probably could give some views of this. What we have done, and when I said the answer is not literally a country, but it's more a regional issue, is not a question of a political party of a regional issue, but I think the actual way that the bourgeoisie rules is largely an issue which is regional. The question of a stability, the question is, what do you consider stable? Pakistan, stable as a state? Pakistan has nuclear power. Iran, stable? Iraq, stable? The definition of stability is also one we can think about. Is the bourgeoisie agreeing to a rule of effectively its own class and redefining what we call stability? And I think the issue of stability is different now to what we actually called probably stability 10 years ago. Second point, which I think would be important to mention is, for example, when I said about Iran, the Iranian bourgeoisie ruling parties have continuously used the issue of racism against Afghan people in Iran. Afghan people are not only not given the same rights, but even the right of citizenship of Afghan people in Iran is denied. If an Iranian woman marries an Afghan man, their child does not have a birth certificate, cannot go to school. So the idea of looking at the issue of racism and division that what bourgeoisie does is the same everywhere, with harsher implications in different places. One of the issues that has been risen in Iran is, as far as we are concerned, I think for the working class, is to actually say, not only we don't accept this, which they have been doing, but openly actually coming in support of recognition of workers and against the division. Just to mention this, workers at Haftar on their strike about 10 days ago, immediately almost after Taliban was announced to have taken complete control. One of their slogans was, every Afghan is not only welcome here, but our heart beats with you. And we recognize the rights of Afghan people, whether in Iran or in Afghanistan. Solidarity from bottom up, that's what I mean in terms of building solidarity and action. Support for the movement that is in Afghanistan at the moment. I think recognition of the fact that it doesn't matter embryonic, small, large, or how widespread, etc. I think it's a deep movement within Afghanistan, which is actually fighting against Taliban. The way it presents itself, the way it actually manifests itself may be different. Like all the movements, sometimes it's hidden, sometimes it's open to the public to see. But there is a huge movement against Afghan. And in this movement, the bourgeoisie, again, is trying to put this answer. Massoud, in Panjshir, and other bourgeois are providing one answer, one alternative to Taliban. And there is another alternative that doesn't actually recognize, even Massoud has not even said that they want to have any form of secularism in the region. The idea of redefining people as Muslims doesn't wash in Middle East anymore. There is no such thing as this is a Muslim approach. It doesn't exist. The class has taken, the actual class struggle is the main issue. And recognizing that means that parties that actually rely on gathering people under the name of Islam is another alternative of bourgeoisie. And as soon as that is recognized, I know in the media, in the general internationally, we tend not to see this. But it is not true that when people in Afghanistan go actually and stand up and say, we don't want Taliban, and a woman actually holds a banner and says, it is the right of every woman to be recognized as a man and as a human being, and the fact that they do not actually recognize the issue of religion as determining factor, I think is showing a change in the whole area. And this is, I think, what we have to rely on. Class struggle, solidarity in action, bottom up, recognition of refugees, welcoming them, and fighting against individual states everywhere against recognition of Taliban, irrespective of whether the US has forces there or doesn't have forces there. There is no different Taliban. This is the same Taliban, but the Taliban of today, the same as the fascists of 1940 are no different from the fascists of today, but obviously they act according to the current scenario. Taliban of today, there is no democratic Taliban, there is no new Taliban. It's the same Taliban running the party of today. That's it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Comrade Aman. Farouk, are you ready?
Yes, thank you very much, all the comrades. I think there are 4 points I would briefly touch in these 5 minutes. First of all, I think let me also propose a conference of the left from Iran, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, at least to have an initial conference online maybe, and of course supported by our comrades across the world. We badly need such an initiative. Second thing I want to say is that I fully agree with Comrade Aman. What he said is in his initial lead off. We need to recognize huge changes that have taken place. He pointed out few of them. I want to also touch a couple of more. For instance, Afghanistan was one of the countries that was really urbanizing. The urbanization rate was very high. When I went to Kabul for soon after the overthrow of Kabul, Taliban 2001, population of Kabul was less than 500,000. Presently, it is perhaps 6 million. There is no census for many years, many decades actually, but these are some of the figures that are available. So from 500,000, it went up to 6 million. Same is the case with other major cities, Herat, Mazar-e Sharif, even Jalalabad and so on. So urbanization is taking place. Secondly, the money that came, whatever was spent there, it gave birth to a service sector. By and large, there is no industrialization. It was mainly into the services sector. Comrade Aman pointed out media, which was one of it, no doubt. And also, I think the most significant change was in relation to women. I think their struggle, usually the academics and intellectuals, they reduce the women's struggle to sort of certain very set things when they are on the roads, when they are forming parties, when they are contesting elections. In fact, I learned from the Afghan comrades, our women comrades there, that look, the women's struggle, the most important women's struggle is when a girl in the morning is arguing with her brothers and father that I will be going to school. And when she's fighting for her right to work, that is, a definition they have in Afghanistan. So that was the most, important change that was not there. And then the demographic fact that Comrade Aman pointed out, a huge chunk of the population has grown up or even born after the 9/11 period. Second thing was like, a lot of talk about China and US imperialism and so on. I won't really go into that. Interesting debate. To be honest, I don't have my own developed viewpoint on it. I want to wait on, I want to look some more developments. But of course, the debates are important. Last thing that I would like to elaborate more is the character of Taliban, the perspective. I think we have already seen some of the expressions of Taliban. I think there was no disagreement here that there are no new Taliban. All the talk about and all this effort to rebrand Taliban was actually to sort of make them acceptable. The thing is, China, Russia, EU, USA, everybody wants to recognize them. It was the speed, as Comrade Aman pointed out, that has upset the whole plan. Everybody wants to recognize them for their own interests. That was why perhaps we were having this whole rebranding of Taliban. But as one of our Afghan comrades pointed out, that look, the Taliban have only horns. They have no head. That is to say, they only know the use of force. They only know the use of their barbarism. They do not have modern ideas to deal with a changing Afghanistan. It is repeatedly Afghans, liberal, left, every kind of people, men, women on social media, they are pointing out, they are saying it, that it's not Taliban who have changed, it is the Afghanistan that has changed. What is not being recognized by Taliban is the fact that Afghanistan has changed. Now, that is both a hope and tragedy, because, the way they have lost some of the gains they made last 20 years through their hard struggles, they are really at risk, have been lost in many ways. But also, this is the hope. This is the hope, that we can count on for the future. And most important thing, will it last? Will Taliban stay on? I think if the governments are recognizing them, from USA to Russia, which is most likely, if we do not oppose it, if in the absence of a solidarity movement, it will happen. If it happens, then they may last another maybe 15 to 20 years. If there is a solidarity movement, if there is a resistance, if there is an intervention, then this regime may be unstable. Of course, there are many internal contradictions. It's not the same Taliban in the sense of the central control. There are many factions at the mega level and micro level. There are many contradictions, already disagreements. Last 2-3 days, both in Afghanistan and Pakistan, people have been pointing out that Mullah brother was injured, shot injured by a rival faction during the formation of the government, where Pakistani ISI had to intervene. So these are just the indications. But as we know, I mean, politics is complicated. Very strong, solid perspectives can go wrong, and sometimes very unseen, very unexpected developments can prove us wrong. But for now, I think a lot is in the air. It depends on a lot of factors. On the one hand, from their viewpoint, things are going in their favor. They can consolidate and stabilize. On the other hand, the hope is the resistance emerging within Afghanistan. And if we are able to build a solidarity movement around that on a at least regional scale and to some extent global scale, then the things can be upset for and go in the favor of Afghan people and the working classes. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you, Farooq. And finally, Hamid, please.
I would like to speak upon 2 or 3 points. First of all, I would like to say that Taliban didn't defeat the American imperialism. And same as in history, we understand that the jihadists, the dollar mujahideen, didn't defeat the USSR. This is the same phenomenon from which we can understand that the internal contradiction and their organic incapability of forwarding the system is the basic reason of their demise. Whether that is USSR or it is the start of the demise of American imperialism or neoliberalism. I will contradict one comrade said that it's just a fact. I think we should not make any analogy in the past century with the latest defeat of America. As today, the whole capitalist system is incapable of going forward. It has lost its all capabilities of development and progressive nature. Today, as they had in last century, they had a vast area of China where they introduced and they export their techniques and means of production to keep the capitalism producing commodities and goods and going ahead. But with the start of this new century, there is no space for imperialism or for capitalism to explore any new area in which they can invest and they can get out rid of the inherent recession or the incapability of they are facing the great problem of the profit of rate of ratio. They cannot attain the same ratio as they had in previous century. So I think it is not a great defeat, yes, but it is the start of a great defeat and unfolding of the neoliberalism, and its defeat is now unfolding on world scale level. It started from Afghanistan and it will go beyond the limits. As we see that the defeat of America in Afghanistan, its repercussions on Pakistani state and in Pakistani government. Nowadays, there is a lot of conflicts and contradictions during in the Pakistani state, and there will be, I think, will be a change in Pakistani government sooner or later due to this change in Afghanistan. And we saw the first time from 1949 till now that the NATO is taking the effects of the American defeat in Afghanistan. The European Union, the Germany and the France, etc., are separating their ways from America. They are obviously saying that America is an untrusted friend. So its repercussions in early stage is so vast, and we can see these snowball effects will be affecting the whole capitalist system and the whole world very soon. And at the same time, I will agree with Comrade Aman that Taliban in 90s and Taliban now are the same. Their brutality, their fundamentalist thoughts, and their relation to the ancient past, they have no program for the Afghan people, for the Afghan working class, or for the Afghan economy, are building the Afghan state on capitalist basis. As a power like America couldn't build a state on capitalist basis or new liberal methods. So Taliban, who has just the program of charity, they cannot build a state in Afghanistan or can establish some social institution. So I will also respond to Silvana's question about the demonstrations of the women. There are three kinds of demonstrations in Kabul or across Afghanistan. One kind of demonstrations are for the women's rights. They are behind the Taliban forces, as Farooq mentioned, from second day of the control of the Taliban on 17th of August. They defied, they faced very bravely the Taliban. That movement is basically a revolutionary content that has a revolutionary content in its nature. But at the other hand, some demonstrations were there from women which were demonstrating for the Panjshir resistance, the National Resistance Front, which I think is a reactionary resistance because they have explicitly asked from America and India the help of money and weapons, and they were ready to become a proxy for America and for India. And the third demonstration, we saw the girls or the women in the burqa. Those were basically, most of them were Taliban. They were wearing burqas, and second, those girls who wanted to continue their studies, the Taliban promised them that come into burqas and come to our demonstration, then we will let you go to your university, colleges, or schools. That was a blackmailing style of the Taliban because they do not have any sympathy in all over Afghanistan. But this defeat, this retreat of American imperialism, and with their evacuation, their morale are temporarily very high. We can see its repercussions across the Durand line here in Pakistani cities and areas. The fundamentalists are really rejoicing this victory, but we, as a comrade, we every time, and we have to, and we are saying the positive aspects of any protection, even very phenomenal. So we have a strong comrades and very good people who were in the movement of the revolution, and they are in number, millions in number. So we hope that a strong force will emerge during this reactionary and black process. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Comrade Hamid. And thanks to all the speakers, thanks to everybody who participated. I think we had comrades from 7 countries who took part. I think this discussion has been in the best traditions of WIN. We do meet every week. Next week, we're discussing the environment. Comrade Jim Hollinshead, I think is still here, will be leading off. And I hope to see you then. Thanks, comrades. Bye-bye.